The following story is also available as a read-only version. Check the link in the description if you're interested. This short story is part of A Day in the Life of Hugo Hendricks. It consists of 4 stories, which should be read in no particular order, and were released in an order determined by a random number generator. I strongly encourage you to read the other 3 after this one to get a full picture of what this collection is about. They can be found on my blog, whoisbetty.com, or as audio narrations on the Who Is Betty YouTube channel. At 6 in the morning, the rooster's crow yanked Hugo Hendricks out of his sleep. With a robotic motion, he hit the tin animal on the head, silencing it. Lying in his bed, he took a deep breath before heaving himself up and stepping onto the bamboo weave that covered his floor. Through the glass door to his narrow balcony, he could see the first sunlight of the day wash over the green parks and rooftop gardens. He took a glance at the e-reader on his nightstand to see if he'd missed any messages during the off hours. There was nothing. Not that he'd expected anything. The internet got turned off from midnight to 6, and only law enforcement channels remained open. Rubbing the sleep out of his eyes, Hugo put on the honeydew avocado linen tunic and trousers that were his uniform, all the while stepping into the kitchen to his bowl of chia seeds and yogurt. As every night, they had grown very well in size, so he added salt and sugar, 2 teaspoons of Nutri-Powder, and mixed the paste into a pulp with 2 quickly diced apples. When he was finished, he stepped outside and looked into the courtyard, deciding to grab a second bowl of chia seeds and yogurt, which he had the foresight to prepare the night before, and repeated the procedure. 2 bowls of nutrient pulp in hand, Hugo took the outdoor stairwell and walked onto the grass of the courtyard barefoot. Lying on a bench, the same sweaty business shirt sticking to his skin as the day before, was Abel Malloy. It was surprising that he hadn't fallen off the bench and spent the night in the grass, but then Abel had never been an active sleeper. "Top of the morning, partner," Hugo nudged Abel with his foot. His old friend only turned his head. Hugo nudged him harder. "Wake up, we have important work today." This time, Abel fell off the bench. "What the fuck?" he complained after landing face down in the grass. Spitting, Abel rolled and jerked upward, almost punching Hugo's bowls out of his hands. "Language, Abel. Paragons and exemplars, remember?" "Could you not just let me sleep, maybe die from the cold?" The smell of alcohol was still heavy on him. "You shouldn't spend the night on benders. You're a balance keeper. People look up to you," said Hugo as he set the bowls on the table. "No, you're a balance keeper. I'm a population ecologist who happens to work with a balance keeper. I can drink what I want," Abel protested. He sat down and dug right into the food. With his diet and eating habits, he had to live in a constant state of hunger. "At least smoke marijuana like the other druggies," Hugo suggested. "No can do, Haas. Alcohol kills faster. Remember when we were kids back home? You remember home, right, Vermont? When we were kids and life was good?" The question was rhetorical. "We were, I think, 17, 18? Old Uncle Eric's moonshine?" Abel clicked his tongue. "What I wouldn't give for some of that sweet poison." "You also remember that old Uncle Eric got arrested for that? Distilling alcohol is illegal for a reason." "Hence why I have to get drunk on beer," said Abel. "Starting the self-pity early today, are we?" asked Hugo. "Fuck you, dude, I'm entitled." Abel gulped down his breakfast. "What's on the schedule anyway?" he asked, mouth full. Hugo frowned. "We meet up with someone incredibly important, as I have told you yesterday." "If he's so important, how come I don't remember him?" Abel asked. "Man, you are killing it today. I don't know who he is, but I know he works for the Intercommunal Oversight Committee." "Ah, yes, the federal government," said Abel. Hugo shook his head. They're not a federal government, they just make sure all the communes abide by the environmental protection laws. National governments are a huge strain on Mother Earth. Whatever makes you sleep at night, Abel shrugged. At least it's not booze. The glider plane ascended into the sky, launched from a ramp near the compound. It was an ultralight vehicle with a small cockpit cabin that seated a pilot and 2 passengers. The super-efficient solar cells on its enormous wings powered a twin-electric engine designed to keep it airborne for longer, as it silently soared across the firmament. Down below, farmers with their oxen plowed the fields, and a small file of riders galloped across the hills on their horses. Planes like this one were only available to important commune officials, and they were always careful to use them only when absolutely necessary. Today qualified. Not only were they headed for the old city, they were picking up a ranking IOC constable. A scale holder, to be precise. The type of person who told balance keepers what to do. After almost an hour of flight, during which Hugo only needed to boost the plane twice, the airfield of the local IOC outpost became visible. It was both farm and ranch, and had a whopping 12 grain silos. Underground, Hugo knew, was a massive refrigeration unit, in which they kept food stocks in case of a shortage in any of the surrounding communes. Only the Intercommunal Oversight Committee was allowed to use refrigeration, and exclusively to maintain storage. The ability to store food indefinitely did not only cost huge amounts of energy, but also encouraged the hoarding of resources and the practice of overburdening one's fields. Hugo made a smooth landing and used the remaining momentum to taxi the plane as close to the launch ramp as possible. When it didn't quite reach, he and Abel jumped out to push it the last few yards. Standing by the ramp was a tall, bald man with amber eyes and butterscotch skin. He wore an olive trench coat against the cool morning air and radiated a sublime authority. He waited for them to bring the plane almost directly to his feet before even acknowledging their existence. "Good day, gentlemen. I am scaleholder Josiah Murillo, happy to make your acquaintance." They reciprocated the greeting and proceeded to tie the plane into the launch ramp. Murillo made no attempt to help them. Only when the hydraulic mechanism had launched them into the air again did he even speak. His voice was a sharp, dangerous whisper, the voice of a man best not crossed. "Today we will be apprehending an incredibly destructive man," he explained. "He has done more harm to Mother Earth than anyone you've ever met. His threat to the harmony of humans and nature is so grave that the Commission's chairman has personally instructed me to bring him down." "What'd he do?" asked Abel after Murillo had stayed silent for almost a solid minute. "Illegal births. Hundreds of them. He's a physician, and a very prolific one at that." He showed them the image of a round-faced man with small, brown eyes, chaotic grey stubble on his jowls, and a receding hairline on his e-reader. "Dr. Solomon Gottschalk. As you can see, his dark practices have allowed him to put on quite a bit of surplus weight. But that is the least of his crimes. There's a reason physicians were the first to die in the Green Plague. They were disrupting the natural order, and Mother Earth could not take it." "We go when she calls us," said Hugo, reciting one of the first lessons he'd learned in school. The words doctor and physician drove shivers down his spine. They were unnatural abominations of the Grey Age. Exactly, but what's worse is trying to overwhelm her with human invaders. As a species, we have a tendency to snowball outside of our carrying capacity and destroy all life around us. That must be kept under control. Murillo switched off the computer. "Any 2 people must only have a single child until we have reached perfect balance. You're a population ecologist, Mr. Malloy, are you not? You understand this better than anyone." Hugo couldn't see Abel, but he could feel his old friend grimace behind him. "I do. I have a lot of experience with the matter," he said, and left it at that. Hopefully, Murillo was simply ignorant of Abel's past. Had we not captured his assistant, one Dr. Herschel Stone, we would never even have heard of Dr. Gottschalk's crimes, Murillo explained. Underneath, the old city came into view. Despite animals and greenery having begun their reclamation, the complex grid of blocks and streets was still the shaping force of the landscape. Shrubs, grass, and tree roots were cracking the blacktop, but it was still clinging onto the ground like a blanket trying to suffocate life. About a dozen houses were still occupied and maintained, inhabited by small communes, families, or city hermits too stubborn to leave this unnatural habitat, even as nature was reconquering it. Across the river was the only commune integrated into the IOC in the midst of the old city. The Green Dome, named after the dome of the former Capitol building, which had been wrapped in turf, symbolizing a new era for the nation that hurt Mother Earth the most. Hugo landed the plane on a small airstrip, where 5 young farmers immediately helped them pull into the hangar. They all showed great deference to Murillo, who signaled Hugo and Abel to let them do their job and not lend a helping hand. There must be an air of superiority around those in the highest levels of the IOC, lest the communes lose respect for our authority. If we want to protect Mother Earth, we need their cooperation. The easiest way to get it is if they think they have no other choice. Murillo, apparently familiar with the Green Dome commune, led them away from the central building and toward the old White House. Oddly shaped fields and gardens were separated by asphalt roads and tiled walkways, as parks had been transformed into a means of growing food in the city. People of the old world rejoiced at the notion that they could hold Mother Earth hostage in their parks, and she forgave them for it when they came to her for help. Now the parts of her that were once held prisoner gave sustenance to her former jailers. The clemency was almost poetic. In an oval office, a Japanese man with light brown hair and a stern face cordially greeted them. He looked to be in his mid-40s, but still very lean and fit, wearing a crimson achkan. The walls were painted pine green, and a part of the ancient desk dominating the room had been replaced, with a carving of a blooming tree in much lighter wood. The floor consisted of simple interlocking tiles of that very same wood, leading Hugo to believe that it was local. "A good day to you, Hiro Kichida, Communal Administrator," the Japanese man said with a nod to Hugo and Abel. "I wasn't expecting you so soon, Scaleholder." "I couldn't possibly let this man roam free any longer," said Murillo. Kichida nodded. "We have, unfortunately, been unable to locate him on our own, though I see you have brought trained investigators to remedy that." "I assume you have cordoned off Dr. Gottschalk's old residence and practice?" Murillo asked. "Of course. None of my people entered it, as you asked, but we're certain he's no longer in. If you were to investigate soon, I could use the manpower put aside to guard it back on the fields." Scaleholder Murillo nodded. "It's dangerous for your people in there. The thoughts this man had could contaminate their minds and return them to the state of being polluting creatures." Hugo detected a hint of irritation on Kichida's face. "I'll send a guide with you as soon as you please, Scaleholder." The sky was darkening, and a drizzle of rain began. Solomon Gottschalk's house was around 2 marching hours away. An inconspicuous edifice, its brick walls were covered in well-maintained greenery, hiding the fantastic state of repair the building was in. With overflowing planter boxes on every window, a wild-growing garden, and turf on the roof, it was more reminiscent of a house-shaped hill than a home from the Grey Age. Only the buzz of the air-conditioning unit, the solar panels, and the steel-framed security doors suggested anyone but Mother Nature was residing here. What an insulting way to live for a doctor. Two young men and one woman were sitting around the table on the porch, playing Go under a tarp so as to not be soaked in the rain. When they saw Murillo approach with Hugo and Abel in tow, they rose and bowed in reverence before the scale holder. Instead of paying them any attention, Murillo produced a small dark cone from his coat and stuck it onto the keyhole. He motioned for everyone to step away from the door, then waited for a moment. The shaped charge going off was the loudest thing Hugo had ever heard. It resounded through the neighborhood, sending several flocks of birds flying. Hugo was trained in the use of weapons but had only worked with air guns before. He knew that the IOC was in possession of Grey Age weaponry at Mount Weather, which he would be equipped with in case of a widespread polluter insurgency, but he'd never thought explosives to be among them. Murillo kicked in what remained of the door, readying his pistol, motioning Hugo and Abel inside. Hugo's eyes needed a moment to adjust to the darkness. The floorboards creaked under his heavy boots. "Malloy, you're upstairs. Hendricks, you take the basement. I'll be checking this level," Murillo instructed and disappeared through an open doorway on the left. His airgun at the ready, Hugo pushed open the door underneath the stairwell. Like a classic polluter, Gottschalk had left the xenon tube lighting in his basement on. It consisted of 3 rooms, one of which was a tiny closet containing a battery pack for the solar panels on the roof. It could be accessed through what appeared to be his office. The tables were overflowing with neat stacks of paper and color-coded folders. There was an enormous bookshelf filled with everything from heavy biochemistry journals to anatomy guides to 2 entire shelves dedicated solely to something called the New England Journal of Medicine. An X-ray screen, switched off, hung above a collection of carefully labeled radiographic images. Lists of ominous chemicals, as well as strange symbols reminiscent of broken honeycombs, covered 2 whiteboards and a chalkboard. Gottschalk was such a filthy polluter that he had not 1, but 2 computers under his meticulously organized desk. His laboratory proper was even worse. Hugo had been told creepy bedtime stories of doctors as a child, but what he saw here was much worse than anything he could have imagined. Bottles upon bottles of chemicals lined the shelves and cupboards. 3 microscopes stood next to each other on a sterile island counter, stacks of notepaper and strange machines all around them. Gottschalk had tiny, rigid handwriting which, in addition to the fact that Hugo had no understanding of the evil acts this doctor had been performing down here, made the notes almost impossible to read. Pots, bowls, and mixing machines were on the far end of the room. A blender, a collection of beakers, and an electric stove to cook dark concoctions with. It sent a shiver down Hugo's spine. But the worst were the 2 gigantic refrigeration units giving off their unnatural whir. With bated breath, he opened one of them and found it full of flat cylinders made of glass. Many had patches of black, green, or white in them, and most contained at least some amount of thick yellow liquid. Whatever the doctor was brewing down here, it could not be good. All of these Grey Age machines and books. Books which should have been destroyed and recycled, not hoarded as useless plant matter. But the physician responsible for it all was not there. It would have been too easy. Damn. Hugo spun around, instinctively pointing the weapon at the source of the noise. It was Abel, looking over some of Gottschalk's notes. "What are you doing down here?" Hugo asked, lowering his gun. There's nothing to see upstairs. Bedroom, exercise room, bath," was the response. "Down here? Boy, oh boy, this guy is one hell of a neat freak. Right angles, everything is sterile. The guy even sorted his pens by size." He pointed at the desk. "Order is humans trying to impose their will on Mother Nature," said Hugo. "This man must have a diseased mind. Nobody should have to keep track of enough things to warrant a sorting system." Abel frowned. "You're the tidiest fucking guy I know," he accused. "That's different. A clean home is a clean mind. This place is not clean, it's full." "Wise words, Balance Keeper," Murillo whispered. He had suddenly appeared at the door. "I'll send some people to clear this place out as soon as possible. But in the meantime, we'll be going after our fugitive doctor." He held up a photograph. It showed a cabin in the wild, a group of people standing in front of it, smiling. This must have been taken back in the Grey Age. There was an address written on the back. "All this time, Gottschalk was right under our noses. I'm afraid we have quite the flight ahead of us. We're going to Mount Weather." The flight was silent. It felt as though the sheer weight of Murillo's authority would have drowned out the sound of any conversation. Even in the heavy rain, only 5 boosts were required to make the distance, and Hugo was mighty proud of his flying skills when they landed on the well-maintained airstrip. IOC adjutants in old military uniforms took the plane off their hands and spoke to Murillo, but neither Hugo nor Abel understood a word they were saying. It sounded like English, and most of the words were at least familiar, but it was a harsher, more efficient version of the language, like a constructed pidgin dialect. "Wait over there," the scaleholder instructed, pointing at a spot away from the strip, and went with the uniformed men. Hugo noticed the strange looks the two of them were getting from the IOC personnel. The way they walked and dressed was unusual, very reminiscent of Grey Age fashion Hugo knew from old pictures. These people were disciplined, closed off, trained in things forbidden in all but the most permissive communes. Hugo and Abel were outsiders, intruders into their secret hideout. It was uncomfortable. "So, theories on what the fuck we're actually doing here?" asked Abel. "What do you mean?" Hugo responded. "Come on. You looked at that lab longer than me. Did you see any gynecological examination chairs, any speculums, forceps, cranioclasts, an operating table?" "I don't even know what any of those things are," Hugo confessed. "Well, partner, I do. As a population ecologist, I am trained in birth assistance and all the tools that come with it. Gottschalk has none of them. He's never performed a single birth, at least not in that laboratory," said Abel. Hugo shook his head. "No, you saw what was down there. This man is definitely a physician." "I have my doubts about that," Abel shrugged. "That basement looked like a pathogen lab with a bunch of makeshift pharmacology equipment. He was studying diseases." His old friend looked at the sky for a few moments. "Were there petri dishes in the refrigerators?" "What dishes?" Abel waved it off. "What I want to know is, were the containers inside of those refrigerators labeled?" Hugo shook his head, frowning. "Now, imagine being a guy like that, rigid and organized, and not labeling your petri dishes properly," said Abel. "I'm not sure I'm following," Hugo conceded. "What I'm saying is that our dear Dr. Gottschalk must have been studying a single disease, not multiple. Had he been a medicine maker, he would have studied multiple strains at the same time to maximize profit. He was studying one specific pathogen, and I think I know which one it is." "So?" Hugo prompted Abel after staying silent. "I think it's the Green Plague. I think he was studying the pandemic that ended the Grey Age." "What?" The moment Hugo had expressed his confusion, an electric 4x4 rolled up next to them. One of the IOC soldiers sat at the wheel, a dark-skinned woman with smoke-grey eyes and a black ponytail. Murillo was sitting next to her. He nodded to the back seats, ordering Hugo and Abel to get in. With a soft whir, the vehicle set in motion. Hugo had been inside an automobile before, back when he was training to become a balance keeper. He knew they had once been one of the most hurtful weapons humanity had used against Mother Earth. These days, only the IOC and a few major communes were allowed to operate them, and they had to be electric. "Here's how this will go." Murillo turned around to face them. We're sending strike teams in position around the cabin. We have positive visual confirmation on it, but we're sending you two in first. You're wary travelers who have lost their way and have stumbled upon this house for a place to protect yourselves from the weather." "You've armed strike teams, but you won't go in?" asked Abel. "He's a doctor. He's capable of anything. We have no idea what he's got stored inside that cabin," Murillo explained. "You may have noticed that the inhabitants of Mount Weather act differently than you do, and it is reasonable to believe that he can see that difference too. I believe he won't recognize you as a threat." "I'm wearing a balance keeper uniform," Hugo noted. "There's a change of clothes under your seats. Put it on." Indeed, Hugo found a woolen sweater, an old pair of jeans, and a travel coat down there. Inconspicuous civilian clothing. When he was done changing, Murillo handed him a small plastic button. "If possible, we want you to subdue Gottschalk and get him outside. If that's not possible, we want you to confirm the location is safe for breaching by pressing this button twice in a row. We will then strike, take him out, and extract you. Everything clear?" "Absolutely, Scaleholder," Hugo confirmed. "Yep," Abel agreed. Gottschalk's cabin was in a much worse state than his house in the old city. The rain gutter was trembling and overflowing, and patches of rust had eaten holes into it. Parts of the shingled roof were covered with tarpaulins, and half of the windows were boarded up for a lack of glass. In the Grey Age, this might have been more akin to a forest lodge than a mere cabin. Now, it was a hermit's shelter. Hugo and Abel approached carefully, trying to look the part of lost travelers looking for a place to stay. Despite being an excellent tracker, Hugo could not see the IOC strike teams waiting behind the tree line. "I'm not so sure about this ruse," he said to Abel. "The guy's a physician, after all. He's not rational." "The guy is a guy," his partner responded. "He's got no reason to suspect us. Besides, you're not one to back out of something like this." Hugo puffed. "Of course not. I follow my orders, and if I die, I'll die for Mother Earth." "You should have become a priest," Abel jabbed. A bang, followed by a whiz just above Hugo's head. He ducked, dragging Abel down with him. "Get off my property!" someone shouted from the cabin. Hugo spotted Gottschalk with a rifle poking out of a second-story window. "Turn back and leave!" "Calm down, man. We're not trying to rob you," Hugo responded. "We just need a roof for the rain." "I don't care," the doctor shouted. "Get the fuck out!" "Look, man, we can help you out," said Abel. "Your walls need fixing. My friend here builds houses for a living." He pointed at Hugo. "Just don't let us stand in this weather. I smell a storm coming, and I don't want to get caught in it." "So go up the mountain. You may not have heard, but the IOC has its headquarters there. They ought to give you shelter for the night." Gottschalk sounded a little more sympathetic, but still hostile. "Thing is, we're not really big fans of the IOC," said Hugo, surprised at his own lie. "So we'd rather stay down here and not go up the mountain at all." The doctor needed a moment to think. Then he pulled the rifle in and disappeared. "You silver-tongued devil," Abel whispered. Moments later, Gottschalk opened the door, rifle still in hand, and beckoned them inside. He was a bit thinner than in the pictures, and also looked older. It was quite cozy, especially coming in from the pouring rain. A big couch, 2 armchairs, a thick rug, and an electric heater. The doctor was really living it up in here. "You can hang up your coats in the kitchen. It's got a clothes line and a drain," he said, and locked the door behind them. "Thank you so much," said Abel. "It's really not good out there." "Tell me about it." "It's leaking all over my bedroom." While throwing the coat over the plastic cord, Hugo slipped the radio button into his pocket. "That's got to be terrible," he said. Though, as Abel said, I can help you fix that. Just not today, unfortunately. It'll work, don't worry about it. Gottschalk grunted. He led them into the living room, leaned the rifle onto one of the armchairs, and sat down on it. Hugo and Abel took the couch. So, what brings you fellas up here? Work, mostly. To be honest, we'd rather not discuss it, Abel added. We're not sure what your relationship to the IOC is, so. Insurgents, huh? Yeah, I'm sure you got work to do here. The doctor reclined in his chair, a comfortable expression on his face. As I said, we'd rather not discuss it. For all we know, you're the IOC's gatekeeper. I could say the same about you. But we'll be here a while, and if you don't want to sleep on the porch tonight, how about you tell me what your beef with our federal government is? Gottschalk stroked his rifle, an unmistakable gesture. First you ask us in, now you threaten us? Is that what's happening here? Asked Hugo. Look, I'm a friendly neighbor, but I'm not exactly the most trusting guy. Relax, Hugo. I think we can test the waters, said Abel. Hugo was acutely aware that they had not thought this through. Do you have a kid? Abel asked. Gottschalk shook his head. Never wanted to put one into this world. Well, I do. I actually have two. Used to, at least. Hugo stiffened. Apparently, Abel planned on gaining the doctor's trust not by lying, but by telling the truth. When my wife Bettina became pregnant, it was the greatest gift we'd ever gotten in our lives. We were gonna be a family, live a happy life together, and help maintain the population balance. But then, after Bets gave birth to our first daughter, she was not done. Twins. It was unexpected, unplanned, and the worst thing that could have happened. Abel exhaled. There were tears in his eyes. Hugo knew what had occurred, but had never heard his old friend tell the story. They didn't talk about these things. The IOC custodian expressed his condolences and said that he would allow us 24 hours to pick which of the girls would live. Do you know how impossible it is to do that? Silence. Gottschalk looked at Abel with a mixture of pity and disgust for the people who did this to him in his eyes. We ended up flipping a coin. A goddamn motherfucking coin to decide which of our children was going to live. All because of some ridiculous shit nobody could have foreseen. Abel cleaned tears out of the corners of his eyes. Bettina dealt with it much better than I did. Compartmentalized it. I think the fact that we flipped the coin kept her sane, but I wasn't so lucky. I drank, I shouted, I broke things. After 2 years, she took the baby and left, just like that. Never saw her again. Wow, said Gottschalk. I'm very sorry for your loss. It's fine. I'm fine. Nowadays I am, at least. There was nothing else to say. They sat in the living room, listening to the rain, until finally Gottschalk rose from his chair and produced a folder of documents from a cabinet. Look, normally I wouldn't do this, but I'm in a tight spot right now and I need this to get out. I have some things I want to share with you, and then you'll have to take those things and inform whatever insurgent cell you work with about them. He opened the folder. It was filled with pages upon pages of graphs, tables, and texts, as well as those strange honeycomb pictures that had been in his lab. My mother was born inside Mount Weather. She had 2 brothers and a sister. You know why? He didn't wait for a response. Because they don't care about the laws up there. She was told she was special, better than the people who lived outside. She was told stories of the old world as it was, with all its commodities, luxuries, and amenities. They also taught her about the commoners, the poor and middle-class people that kept on reproducing even though that wasn't supposed to happen. They said she was the descendant of the wealthy, People who had created all the beauty in the world and given all the spoils to those leeches below them. But the leeches were becoming too many, threatening to destroy the earth forever in their endless greed, so a drastic step was taken. Gottschalk pointed at a picture of a world map. The CO2 output of each country was listed on it. They began to work on a solution. The fundamental problem was that there were too many people, and those people kept procreating. If the wealthy wanted to keep guiding the world, keep it on the right path, they would have had to take control of how people breed. And the first step was to kill off the majority of the population. This folder contains irrefutable scientific proof that what we know as the Green Plague was manufactured by a private biomedical corporation in South Africa. There was a vaccine from the very beginning, and everyone involved in the project got it, as did their families. The ideology we adhere to, the IOC, the teachings about Mother Earth, the laws and system of government, everything our society believes was planned years before the first outbreaks in India by a marketing firm in Manhattan. He turned pages until reaching a collection of memos and something called a design document. Different cultures got different packages, of course, to be in line with their quirks and tropes. It was a massive undertaking. When the Green Plague reached American shores, all of the wealthiest, most powerful people in the country were already living inside the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Center. They have a replica of the Oval Office in there, from which the president used to send out broadcasts to give the impression he was still in Washington. Today it's the office of the IOC chairman. They live like kings in there, just like people in the Gray Age did. And they despise every single person like you and me, because they believe the world belongs to them, and we ought to be their obedient subjects. Abel skimmed through the documents, eyes wide. "How did you find out about all this?" he asked. "My mother taught me a lot of things, but above all, she taught me how to teach myself. She hated her own people, wanted everyone to be free to rebuild and bring justice to all. She made it her life's work to gather all this evidence, and when she died, I took that burden onto myself. Unfortunately, they snatched up my apprentice. He talked, and I had to flee, lay low for a while," Gottschalk explained. "This is a terrible place to hide," Hugo decided. "You're right at the foot of Mount Weather." "Is it, though? They would never suspect me here. It's an unsafe location, a shamble of a building. This is the last place any sane person would hide. That's why I'm here. I just have to lay low until they stop looking for me, and then disappear. Should that never come to pass, I am giving you a copy of my evidence. Be careful with it. They'll kill you if they find out you know this." Hugo grabbed the button in his pocket and gave the signal. "This is ridiculous," he said. "I don't believe you. The IOC is all that stands between us and our lesser nature. Your filthy doctor lies will find no fertile ground in my mind." Before Gottschalk could react, Hugo leapt onto him from the couch. He punched the rifle away and wrestled the old man out of the chair and onto the ground. The door was kicked down by IOC commandos, shouting for everyone to get down. Hugo stayed on top of Gottschalk until the physician was ripped away by one of the soldiers and injected with tranquilizer. Hugo got to his feet, seeing the two soldiers drag the man out. He could feel his mind spinning. The lies this foul polluter had told weighed heavy on his soul, confusing him. Scaleholder Murillo stepped inside, a satisfied smile on his face. It turned into a look of confusion when he looked behind Hugo. "Mr. Malloy, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Hugo spun around, only to see Abel with Gottschalk's rifle in his hands. It wasn't pointed at Murillo or any of the soldiers, but Abel's own chin. "I worked for you. I worked for the people that Killed everyone. I worked for the people who killed my daughter. I don't want to face that. Without another word, he pulled the trigger. The back of his head burst into red mist, and he collapsed on the spot. Murillo's face only showed mild discomfort, as though he'd just tipped over a glass of water and had to clean it up. How unfortunate. He was an intelligent man. He scratched his arm. You, on the other hand, are a loyal man. I very much look forward to working with you again. On behalf of the IOC, I'd like to express my sincerest gratitude. He walked back to the door. I'll leave a driver and a car outside. Take as much time as you need. If you liked this story and would like to hear more, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. A new short story is uploaded every Wednesday, and there will occasionally be another one in between if I find the time. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day.